بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: قل هل أنبئكم بالأخسرين أعمالا الذين ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. One of the most notorious and controversial movements of our time is the Wahhabi movement. This movement has created much controversy, has in some parts of the world, if not most, has distorted the image of Islam in the eyes of non-Muslims and Muslims alike, and has, for the past 2 decades, affected world politics. Tonight, in the next few minutes that we have, I'd like to briefly discuss the development and history of Wahhabism, their general beliefs, and the implications of Wahhabism on world politics, and the future of this movement in the next couple of minutes, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. The founder of this movement, as most people know, is a man by the name of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, born in 1115 after Hijrah, approximately 316 years ago. He was born in the province of Najd in Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, in a suburb of this province called Uyayna. Uyayna is a small village in the province of Najd in the Arabian Peninsula. His father was a scholar, a Hanbali scholar, a judge. For years he studied under his father, Sheikh Abdul Wahhab. He studied Islamic law, Islamic history, tafsir, and theology under his father. However, from his early days, from his first days, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was not satisfied with the religious practices of the people of Najd. He noticed that every year the people of Najd celebrated the birthday of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was not very happy with this. He saw that celebrating the birthday of Rasulullah as a form of shirk. He objected to these practices time and time again. After some time, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab moved to the city of Medina al-Munawwara. Since it was a place of learning and education, he moved there to study for some time. There, he noticed that people would travel from across the globe and come to the city of Medina to pay their respect to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would visit his grave, they would embrace his shrine, they would stand next to his shrine and ask Rasulullah to be their intercessor and to perform shafa'ah on their behalf. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was horrified at this scene. He was disgusted by seeing Muslims embrace and kiss the shrine of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thus, he objected to these practices. From Medina, he decided to go to Sham, to Damascus, and to further his education. However, before he reached Sham, he stopped in the city, in the southern city of Iraq by the name of Basra. He stopped there, and there he saw that people again were celebrating the birthday of Rasulullah and other members from Rasulullah's household and family. Once again, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab objected. He couldn't remain silent, and he was kicked out of the city of Basra. Not having enough money to continue his journey to Damascus, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab came back to the province of Najd. However, since he was kicked out of his hometown, now what's interesting is that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, wherever he went, later on he was kicked out. He was kicked out of Uyayna, he was kicked out of Medina, he was kicked out of Basra. He went back to Najd, but he couldn't settle back. He couldn't settle in his hometown Uyayna, so he went to another province in Najd called, another suburb of Najd called Qurayma. There he remained for several years. His father, who was a judge, Abdul Wahhab, who was a judge in Uyayna, he moved to Qurayma to be a scholar. Thus, he had the privilege of living with his father several more years, where he continued studying under his father. However, the objections of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab continued, and this created tension between himself and his father. His father disapproved of his son's fanatic and extreme opinions. This created tension between him and his father, between him and the people of Najd as well. However, since his father had an overwhelming presence, he had to keep a low profile and had to keep his opinions and movement underground. Once his father passed away in the year 1853, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was now free to speak as freely as possible. His movement was underground. Now he announced his movement. He was publicly calling for people to follow him and join his Wahhabi movement. However, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was lacking political support. He came back to Uyayna, his hometown, and he made an alliance with the governor of Uyayna, who was by the name of Uthman ibn Hamad. He told him that you give me political support, you give me money and an army, and I will give you religious support. I will tell people that you are the Khalifa, you deserve people's obedience, and people will begin to obey you. Uthman ibn Hamad initially accepted to form this pact, this alliance with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. However, when the governor of Al-Ahsa is a province today in the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. It's known for its Shi'i citizens. The governor of Al-Ahsa sent a message to the governor of Uyayna. He told him, listen, I don't advise you to perform an alliance and have a pact with this Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is a lunatic. Thus, the governor of Al-Ahsa was successful in convincing the governor of Uyayna not to perform a pact with Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Of course, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was very disappointed, but nevertheless, he was consistent, he was persistent in finding a political patron who will support him and who will stand by his side. Here, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab went to another suburb of Najd by the name of Al-Dar'iyah. There, the governor of Al-Dar'iyya, his name was Muhammad ibn Saud. Does that name ring a bell? Saudi Arabia, Saud. Muhammad ibn Saud was the grandfather of the Saud family. There he greeted Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he welcomed him to the city, and there in that city, in Al-Dar'iyya, they formed their political alliance. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab would give Muhammad ibn Saud religious authority. He would call people to obey him and to accept him as the leader of the region, not just of Dar'iyya, not just of Najd, but the entire Arabian Peninsula, while Muhammad ibn Saud would support Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab financially, politically. He would give him an army, and he would support his school of thought. From that day, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab formed an army with thousands of soldiers, calling people to his school of thought, to his fanatic and extreme school of thought. He went from suburb to suburb, from city to city, calling people to join his school of thought, and those who refused, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab would declare them as mushrik, not a Muslim, allowing his soldiers to sack those towns, to attack them, to kill their men, to assault their women, to take their cash and belongings and money, just like he would do to a pagan group of people. And this is how Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was successful in spreading his school of thought by power, by killing, by murder, by the support of Muhammad ibn Saud and the Saud family. And before you know it, the entire Arabian Peninsula was under the power of the Saud family, practicing and following the Wahhabi school of thought. This continued until the death of Muhammad ibn Saud in the year 1206 after Hijrah. 1206 after Hijrah, about 200 years ago. Right now it's 1433. This was in 1206. Close to 200 years ago, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab died. However, the school of thought continued. He had established a movement, a religious, political movement in the Arabian Peninsula, and their patrons were the Saudi family. His followers took over the Arabian Peninsula. This included Mecca and Medina. They took over Mecca and Medina and Al-Haramain, Al-Sharifain. As soon as they took over these two holy sites, they went and they destroyed all of the historical sites. Anywhere there was a graveyard and there were buildings built over these graves, they made sure that they're destroyed. This included Al-Mu'alla in Mecca, where Abu Talib is buried, and where Sayyidah Khadija is buried. Inshallah, perhaps at the end of the speech we'll talk about Sayyidah Khadija, because tomorrow, a day like tomorrow, is her death. The 10th of Ramadan marks the anniversary of her death. They destroyed these graves. They destroyed these buildings. In 1216, Prince Saud led an army of 20,000 men from Saudi Arabia. They declared this nation with the name of a family for the first time in history. That a nation, a country is called by the name of a family, the Saud family. Some people choose not to call it Saudi Arabia, they call it the Arabian Peninsula. Prince Saud led an army of 20,000 men from the Arabian Peninsula to Iraq, to the city of Karbala. And it was on the day of Ghadir, Eid al-Ghadir, where most men from the city of Karbala had gone to where on the day of Ghadir? They had gone to Najd to congratulate Imam Ali. The city was empty of men. They raided the city of Karbala, and they killed over 5,000 men in the city of Karbala. And they assaulted many of the women. They looted the haram of Imam Hossein in Karbala. Prince Saud allowed his soldiers to enter the shrine of Imam Hussein with their horses. With their horses. They entered the shrine. They stole all the goods, all the gold and silver, and all the treasure that is inside the shrine of Imam Hussein, and they left. And it became a habit after that. Every once in a while, the Saudi clan would send an army to loot and kill and murder in the cities of Karbala and Najaf. This happened several times. Unfortunately, some historians don't mention this. They only mention the event of the Day of Qadir in 1216. However, there were many raids after that. Many scholars, many Sunni scholars, they objected to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. In fact, Sunni scholars before Shia scholars, they objected to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They disowned him, they excommunicated him from their community. And in fact, the first people to stand in his face and object to him was his father, Sheikh Abdul Wahhab, and his brother, Sheikh Salman. Sheikh Salman not only objected to his brother, but he wrote a book denouncing the beliefs of his brother Muhammad. He wrote a book called As-Sawa'iq al-Ilahiyya fi ar-Radd 'ala al-Wahhabiyya. He wrote a whole book denouncing the beliefs of his brother Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Hanbali scholars were the first that faced Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. They objected to his school of thought. However, because of the strong alliance between the Wahhabi movement and the Saud family, this gave power to the Wahhabi movement. The Saud family designated a portion of the oil revenue that came into the kingdom would go to the Wahhabi movement. A great portion of this oil revenue, that means billions of dollars, were being poured to support the Wahhabi movement. Thus, you shouldn't be astonished to see that today the Wahhabi movement is everywhere. It has filled the Middle East, Europe, even here in America. And I will tell you that there are some main organizations. There are some prominent organizations here in America that are sponsored by the Wahhabi movement and are inspired by the Wahhabi movement. One of those main organizations is the MSA, the Muslim Student Association. The MSA is a well-known organization, and it exists in almost every single campus here in America. The MSA. The MSA has Wahhabi inclinations. It's supported by the KSA, by Saudi Arabia, and you will not be astonished to see that the MSA sometimes it excludes Shia students from their board, from decision making. This was a very, very brief history of the Wahhabi movement. Now, as for their beliefs, and again, I'm going to say this very rapidly and very briefly. Just to review their beliefs, Wahhabis have certain beliefs. Number one of their fundamental beliefs, this is part of their ideology. This is in their system. One of their fundamental beliefs is that you cannot build over a grave. A grave has to be level to the ground. You cannot put anything over a grave. You cannot build a room. You cannot raise that grave a little bit. Nothing. The grave has to be leveled perfectly with the ground. You cannot distinguish between graves. This is in their ideology. And of course, this is the ideology of a scholar or a pseudo-scholar that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was greatly influenced by. And his name is Ibn Taymiyyah. Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah. This is another story. I don't want to confuse you with too many names. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and his followers believe that a grave needs to be level to the ground. Cannot be raised. You can't build anything over a grave. Their proof is two. They say, number one, there's a consensus among Muslims that you cannot build anything over a grave. The grave has to be level to the ground. And number two, a hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam. Ironically, they always neglect Imam Ali, but at this time they actually remember Imam Ali. They say Imam Ali alayhi salam has a hadith that says, وَلَا قَبْرًا إِلَّا سَوَّيْتَ. When he sent his companion Malik ibn Ashtar to Egypt, he gave him several teachings. Among these teachings, وَلَا قَبْرًا إِلَّا سَوَّيْتَ, which literally means don't leave a grave lifted over the ground. No. Sawaita means level up with the ground. So khalas. That's why we destroy all graves. That's why they went into Baqi' in Medina, where our imams, we have 4 imams buried in Jannat al-Baqi' in Medina. They had buildings similar to the buildings in Karbala and Najaf. These buildings were destroyed by the Wahhabism in the early 1900s. The Wahhabi Sheikh at the time issued a fatwa to destroy these graves. That's why right now, if you were to go to the Baqi', of course, women are not allowed to enter. Only men are allowed to enter maybe 2 hours a day. You will see that the grave of the imams are not even distinguishable. You can't distinguish them. There's no plaque. There's nothing. You can't even distinguish which grave is the grave of Imam Sadiq, which grave is the grave of Imam al-Baqir, and so on and so forth. This was one of the fatwas issued by the Wahhabi movement. Now the answer is there is absolutely no consensus among Muslim scholars that says graves have to be level to the ground. In fact, Muslims from day one till today, they build their graves inside mosques. They build a room. They raise the grave. They come and visit the grave of Rasulullah, which is built. And no one before Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab ever objected. So what sort of consensus is this? And as for the hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he said, وَلَا قَبْرًا إِلَّا سَوَّيْتَ, it doesn't mean level it to the ground. This is a person who doesn't understand Arabic, has no knowledge of Arabic. وَلَا قَبْرًا إِلَّا سَوَّيْتَ means don't make it circular shaped. Taswiyah in relation to tasneem. Tasneem means a grave that's circular, just like this podium right here. This is the best example to do. Some graves are pointy. At the end, they're circular shaped or half circular. Imam Ali says it's makruh to have a grave shaped circular. Make it flat. Make it flat or square shaped. Now what does this have to do with flattening a grave to the ground? There's absolutely no relationship between this issue and that issue. Among the fundamental beliefs in Wahhabi Islam is that it is haram to build mosques, specifically mosques and masajid, over graves. Tell them why. He said because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he stated, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْيَهُودَ وَالنَّصَارَى اتَّخَذُوا قُبُورَ أَنْبِيَاءَهُمْ مَسَاجِدَ. And this is in Sahih Bukhari. The Rasulullah said, Allah cursed the Jews and Christians because they turned the graves of their prophets, the graves of their prophets, into mosques. Thus, it is haram to build mosques over graves and turn them into masajid, and to turn them into places of worship. It is haram to build a mosque over a grave. This is the Wahhabi ideology. Wait, we come to the Quran. The Quran tells us the story of the people of Ahl al-Kahf, people of the cave. It's a very long story. When they were discovered, they went back to the cave was closed, and they died inside the cave. What did the people say? The Quran says, فَقَالُوا ابْنُ عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا رَبُّهُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِهِمْ قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. They decided to build a mosque over their grave, a masjid over their grave. And this is a story mentioned in the Quran. And the Quran, when he mentions the story, he doesn't later say that, well, what they did was wrong, or they shouldn't have built a mosque over their graves. Absolutely not. The Quran accepts the story. And I've been to that cave. It's in Amman, Jordan. I've seen that cave, and I've seen the mosque that's built right beside the cave. Thousands of people, they go, annually they go, and they pray inside that mosque for blessing. There's nothing wrong with it. The Wahhabis, they misunderstood this hadith about Rasulullah. If this hadith is authentic and it's credible, they completely misunderstood it. Jews and Christians, they made the graves of their prophets into masajid, meaning they prostrated to those graves out of holiness, out of worship, out of holiness for the owner of that grave. While when we build a mosque over a grave, it's not out of holiness. When we pray in that mosque, we're praying for whom? We're praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not praying for these awliya, for the prophets and the imams. Never. Praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet we choose to pray in such places, for example, the shrine of Rasulullah, or the shrine of Imam Hossein, out of blessing, because we believe that place has a blessing. The Quran says, وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا الْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلًّى. The Quran says that Ibrahim has its footsteps inside the masjid. Go and pray over it. Why? Out of blessing. Because Ibrahim was there. Because it's the footsteps of Prophet Ibrahim. Go and seek blessing. There's nothing wrong with this for barakah. Millions of Muslims enter Hijr Ismail inside Masjid al-Haram. Hijr Ismail is the place right next to the Kaaba. Millions of people, they go and they fight in order to get into that place. And they pray, and it's highly recommended to pray in Hijr Ismail. Even though Ismail himself is buried there, and his mother Hajar is buried there. None of the Muslims objected. No one said this is shirk. No one said there's a problem in praying over a grave. Aisha, the wife of Rasulullah, would pray inside the house of Rasulullah, and Rasulullah was buried inside that house. No one said that what Aisha was doing was shirk, it was blasphemy, it was heresy. She prayed inside her house, and Rasulullah was buried inside that house. Did anyone accuse her of worshiping the grave of Rasulullah, or prostrating towards the grave, to the grave of Rasulullah? No. Among the fundamental beliefs of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab is that it is forbidden to travel to visit any grave. To travel to visit any grave, this is forbidden, even if it's the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thus, if you travel to Medina, you should travel, according to Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, you should travel with the intention of praying inside the mosque, not to worship the grave of Rasulullah. That should not be your intention. If your intention of going to Medina was to visit the Prophet's grave, this is haram. When you tell him, what is your proof? He says in narration by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sahih Muslim, narrated by Abu Hurairah, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated, لا تشد الرحال إلا إلى ثلاثة مساجد مسجدي هذا ومسجد الحرام ومسجد الأقصى. Rasulullah supposedly stated that do not travel to any mosque unless it's the mosque of Masjid al-Haram or Masjid al-Aqsa of Jerusalem or my mosque here in Medina. First of all, the answer is that Rasulullah is talking about traveling. When he says don't travel, he's talking in general. Don't travel to graves. No, he's talking about mosques. Don't travel to any mosque unless it's these three mosques. He didn't say don't travel to visit graves. And again, this takes just a little bit of understanding. A little bit of understanding of the Arabic language and of a hadith, and you'll come to the right conclusion. He didn't say don't travel to graves. He said don't travel to mosques unless it's these three main mosques. This is one. Number two, is it haram to travel to visit mosques? No. Rasulullah is trying to say that these three mosques are special. The one in Medina, the one in Mecca, and the one in Jerusalem. All other mosques are the same. It's not haram to travel, but you don't need to travel. You don't need to travel. I'll give you an example. This is a mosque. And for example, a person living in Cincinnati, Ohio, also has a mosque in his town. He doesn't need to come all the way to Dearborn, Michigan to pray in this mosque. He could pray in that mosque in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is what he's trying to say. Furthermore, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself allows his followers to visit graves. He doesn't say that visiting graves is haram or that it's bid'ah. He says, "Man zara qabri wajabat lahu shafa'ati." He who visits my grave will have my intercession and my shafa'ah. In another hadith, and this is in Wafat al-Wafa, it's a Sunni source. In another book, in Sunan Ibn Majah, a well-known Sunni hadith book, he stated, "Kuntu nahaytukum an ziyarat al-qubur fazuruha." I had previously forbidden you from visiting graves, but now I tell you to visit graves. This is in Sunan Ibn Majah. It's not a Shi'i source, it's not a Shi'i book, it's a Sunnah. One of the fundamental beliefs in Wahhabi school of thought, and this is big for them. This is huge for them. They say that it is haram to seek intercession from any prophet or any imam. It is haram to ask Rasulullah to be your intercessor and for him to perform shafa'ah or any other imam. Instead, go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't need the prophet, you don't need the imam. You can go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you go to the prophet, if you go to the imam, this is shirk. This is basically saying that I have two gods. I have God and I have this prophet. Instead of going to God, you're going to go to this prophet. This is shirk. First of all, and I remember the story. A couple of years ago, I was in Medina. I was inside the Baqi', and we were standing over the grave of al-Banin, the wife of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the mother of Al-Fadl Abbas. We were standing there, and I remember there was a gentleman that was handicapped. He was paralyzed. He was in a wheelchair. He was sitting next to the grave of al-Banin, and he was crying. And I remember that Wahhabi Shaykh, or I'd rather call him Shaitan, he was standing there, and he was yelling at this man that was paralyzed. He was telling him, what you are doing is shirk. This lady can't help you. She can't even help herself because she's dead. I was standing there. I couldn't help but say something. I told him, Ya Shaykh, if you ever get ill, if you become ill, you become sick. If you're diagnosed with cancer, inshallah, and you need to see a doctor, are you going to go see a doctor or not? He said, yeah, I would go see a doctor. I said, this is shirk. This is shirk. Because the Quran says, وَإِذَا مِرَضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِي. If I become ill, Allah will cure. Why do you go to a doctor? Isn't this shirk? Just go directly to Allah. Of course, he didn't want to argue, he started shouting, and fell back. This is This is their ideology, that you don't need to come to the awliya, you don't need to seek intercession from the Prophet or any of the Imams. Go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Tariq ibn Asakir, there's a hadith that Anas ibn Malik, one of the companions of Rasulullah, he came to the Prophet and asked him to be his intercessor on the Day of Judgment, and Rasulullah accepted. Rasulullah said yes. This is in Tariq ibn Asakir, the Quran specifically states that Rasulullah could seek forgiveness for you. Come to Rasulullah and Rasulullah will seek forgiveness for you. The Quran says in Surah An-Nisa, verse 64, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. If they came to you, if they oppressed themselves and they came to you and they sought forgiveness, and Rasulullah also sought forgiveness for them, meaning Rasulullah will ask Allah to forgive his people, they will find Allah to be all forgiving and all merciful. In another verse, Surah Al-Munafiqun, verse 5, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا يَسْتَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ لَوَوْا رُؤُوسَهُمْ. And when the hypocrites are told, come, let Rasulullah seek forgiveness for you, they ignore. And of course, everyone knows the story of the Prophet, of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam. The brothers of Yusuf who were jealous of him, who threw him in the well. They left him to die, and they told their father that our brother was eaten by a wolf. And many years later, their father, Ya'qub, discovered the truth. Of course, they were very embarrassed. They were very embarrassed to face their father, but nevertheless, they wanted to truly repent. So what did they do? They came to their father and they said, Ya Abana, astaghfir lana dhunubana inna kunna khati'in. Our fathers ask Allah to forgive us. The children of Ya'qub couldn't just ask Allah to forgive them. They could, but instead they came to their father. They came to their father who was a prophet. And their father didn't say, go and speak to Allah. He didn't say, just go directly to Allah. He said, yes. قَالَ سَوْفَ أَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكُمْ رَبِّي. He said, yes, I will ask Allah to forgive you. And in the hadith that Ya'qub did not seek forgiveness for them right away. He said, سَوْفَ أَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكُمْ. I will, and in the future, I will seek forgiveness. In a hadith, it's mentioned that Ya'qub wanted to wait till Laylatul Jumu'ah, Thursday night. Because Thursday night is a special night in which the door of Allah's mercy is open for everyone. That night, the Thursday night after Laylatul Jumu'ah, he asked Allah to forgive his son. My dear friends, there's a philosophy behind this. Some might say, well, you know what, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab has a point. Why don't we just go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Hasn't He created all of us? Does Allah put barriers between Him and us? Allah is all merciful. Allah says, call upon me and I'll answer you. Why do we put barriers? Why do we say we have to go to the Ahlul? The answer is, you're right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not put barriers. And we can go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But these are special people. The 12 Imams are special people. Rasulullah is a special person. Fatima al-Zahra is a special person. We can go directly to Allah. But if you want to make sure that Allah will accept and will listen to you, go through people that you will make sure He will not reject. He will say no. He will say no. Sometimes you apply to a job and you're well qualified, you have a good degree, you have good experience, you have a good CV, that's perfect. At the end of the day, you could get the job, you might not get the job. But if you know the son of the person you're applying for, isn't that going to help you? If he gives a letter of recommendation, if that son gives you a letter of recommendation, isn't that letter of recommendation going to help you more? This is how we see the issue of shafa'ah and calling on to our imams. They give us that letter of recommendation. We're qualified, and Allah will answer us, but that letter of recommendation will guarantee that Allah will answer our call and our prayer. Among their fundamental beliefs, that it is haram to seek blessings from the grave of the Prophet and the Imams, from their shrines, from their sand, from their mimbar, anything that belongs to the Prophets and the Imams, you cannot seek blessing. This is shirk. This is shirk. Don't touch anything, don't kiss anything, don't embrace anything. Why? The Quran tells us that some of the belongings of the Prophets and the Imams, they have a blessing. In the story of Yusuf, Yaqub was blind. Yusuf's father, Yaqub, was blind. When Yusuf hears that his father had gone blind, he gives his shirt to his brothers. And he said, go and take this to my father, put it on his face, and he'll get his eyes back. In Surah Yusuf, verse 93, اذهبوا بقميصي هذا فألقوه على وجه أبي يأتي بصيرا فلما أن جاء البشير ألقاه على وجهه فارتد بصيرا. And indeed, his son brings him the shirt of his brother Yusuf. He throws it on the face of Yaqub. Yaqub wipes his eyes with that shirt, and his eyes come back. You can see. Yaqub is a prophet. Yusuf was also a prophet. Yet some of the belongings of prophets, they have blessings. They have blessings. Was Yaqub performing shirk? I don't know, because according to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Yaqub is a mushrik. And so was Yusuf. And so were the brothers of Yusuf. If we want to follow the dogma and the principles of Wahhabism, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Furthermore, historians have narrated that some of the Sahaba would bring their newborn children to Rasulullah for Rasulullah to pat on their heads and to recite a dua. Was this shirk? It was for blessing. It was merely for blessing. This has been mentioned in Al-Asaba fi Ma'rifat al-Sahaba, Sunni source. In another source, Al-Musannaf ibn Abi Shaybah, that some of the Sahaba would come to the mimbar of Rasulullah, they would come to his pulpit, and they would kiss it. They would embrace it out of blessing. Because it was the same pulpit that touched the skin of Rasulullah. It's full of blessing. No one said this is shirk. No one objected. No one told them to stop. Not only that, Abu Bakr and Umar, the first two Khulafa, historically the first two Khulafa, they requested that they be buried in the same room as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Why didn't they ask to be buried anywhere else? Out of blessing. Because they wanted to be blessed by the grave of Rasulullah. They asked that they also be buried there. No one said that this is shirk. No one said that this is blasphemy. And finally, among their beliefs is that it is haram to celebrate the birthday of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And why? What is the reason that it is haram to celebrate the birthday of Rasulullah? That it's shirk. Is there any other proof that they have? Other than that it's shirk, everything for them? It's shirk, and that it's blasphemy, and that it's paganism to celebrate the birthday of Rasulullah? Well, the answer is that Muslims have been celebrating the birthday of Rasulullah for 14 centuries, and no one said that it's shirk. No one said that it's blasphemy. And what is wrong with celebrating the birthday of Rasulullah? To honor it, to respect it. In every country, in every civilization, in every culture, there are certain men or women or heroes, there's figures that are respected. We celebrate their birthdays, we celebrate the day of their death, and so on and so forth. Rasulullah doesn't deserve that his nation celebrates his birthday and honors him. While the Quran says, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ وَعَزَّرُوهُ وَنَصَرُوهُ. Azzaruhu means they honor him The Quran calls Muslims to honor Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to respect him, and to honor him. This was a brief summary of their beliefs. Now, my dear friends, my dear brothers and sisters, today Wahhabism is very strong. It's very powerful. And it has a lot of implications on world politics. Look at the past 20 years. Look at how Wahhabism has changed world politics. Not just in the Middle East, but even here in America. Wahhabism has changed world politics. It has distorted the image of Islam. And the worst of all is that Saudi Arabia, headed by the Wahhabi movement, is an ally to the US and Europe. And there are several reasons why Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia are allies to the US, or why the US has chosen for the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia to be their allies. Number one, they're anti-Iran. Wahhabis are anti-Iran. And so is the general public policy, the foreign policy here. Thus they have mutual interests. Number two, they're both pro-Israel. Anti-Iran and pro-Israel. Of course, the general policy in America is pro-Israel. This is not a shock. But what is a shock is that an Islamic government in the heart of the Muslim nation is pro-Israel, sponsors Israel, and supports Israel. And there are certain facts that during the 2006 July war between Israel and Lebanon, Saudi Arabia was in fact sponsoring Israel. It was sponsoring Israel against Lebanon, against the Shia of Lebanon. Number three, oil. The U.S. does not want to lose an ally because that ally is rich with oil. And number four, they're distorting the image of Islam. And this serves the interests of many. What is our job, my dear friends? Just very briefly. What is our job and our responsibility towards this movement? In my humble opinion, I feel that it is necessary to expose this movement, to talk about this movement, to let people know what this movement is all about, what their history is all about, and how they use terrorist tactics. Our job is to counter their attacks, their ideas, and their accusations. And if we can, we need to try to convince the U.S. and other Western powers to pull their support from that ally, from that Wahhabi ally. We need to convince our friends here in America that Wahhabis are not genuine friends. And we need to remind them that 16 out of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 from Saudi Arabia, and they were Wahhabi. 16 out of the 19 hijackers were Wahhabi. We need to remind our friends here in America that Osama bin Laden is a Wahhabi, and that Al-Qazwini is a Wahhabi organization, and it's a Wahhabi movement. And that those who will come to power in Syria after the fall of Bashar will most likely also be Wahhabi. And we are seeing signs that even in Egypt, perhaps, the Wahhabi movement is on the rise. We need to convince our Sunni brothers and sisters to pull their support from the Wahhabi movement, and we need to push for Al-Azhar University to be the main spokesman for the Sunni school of thought, and not the Wahhabi school of thought. We need to convince our Sunni brothers and sisters, don't allow Wahhabis to speak in your name. Don't allow Wahhabis to be your representatives. Allow a more moderate group to represent you, to represent the name of Islam, such as Al-Azhar University. I ask my dear friends, this was something very brief regarding Wahhabism. I ask them